The Scent of Emptiness, a Zen teaching on seasonlessness. The man who chased a scent. In a quiet seaside village in Japan, there lived a perfumer named Takeshi. He worked as if speaking with the plants, sensing the memory behind each fragrance. But lately, something felt missing. The scent of flowers was the same. The earth still carried the memory of rain. But the meaning behind those aromas had faded. One day, he closed his shop. With no map, no compass, he set off. "There is a scent," he said, "but it's not found in any flower. Not in time. It lives somewhere inside me, but I don't know how to reach it." The silent lesson of the seasons. Takeshi walked the mountain paths. Spring buds, summer sun, autumn leaves, winter winds. The seasons passed through him like slow rivers. Each taught him something, and each quietly disappeared. He realized, everything changes, but something within me stays constant. Feel the scent there. As the seasons turned, his questions softened. He stopped chasing. He began noticing the scentless temple. One misty morning, he reached a small Zen temple on a mountain peak. At its gate, a wooden sign read, "No flowers grow here, but there is senselessness." Takeshi stepped inside. There was no incense, no tea, no lilies, no pine, only silence. Inside, an old monk sat quietly. His name was Enso. Takeshi bowed and spoke. "I've lost the scent, but I still feel its trace. I don't know its name, but I long to reach it. What does scentlessness teach?" Enso smiled. "The true scent is not in the flower, not in the past, not out there. You can only sense it through emptiness." Takeshi blinked. "But how does emptiness smell?" Enso closed his eyes. "It's not a scent. It's a state, a moment, a way of being, and it's hidden within everything. Being in the center of emptiness." Zen teaches, emptiness is not nothingness. It is where all things are born. From that night on, Takeshi stopped searching for flowers. He stopped analyzing scents. He simply breathed. He simply paused. He simply was. And one morning, sitting in a snowy garden, he felt it, a scentless scent. Impossible to describe. Impossible to forget. It belonged to no season, yet was found in all of them. A seasonless place within. Takeshi realized, I was always chasing spring, but true peace lives in the seasonless. Because Zen teaches that peace is not found in what is fleeting, but in the stillness that flows with change. The mind that clings to a season will suffer, but the mind that flows like water becomes free. Eating seasonlessness before sleep. Now you too are lying in your bed. Perhaps winter lives in your mind, or the longing of spring, or the echoes of a past summer. But tonight, there is no season, no weather forecast, no yesterday, no tomorrow. There is only now, only this breath, only you. Peace from the scent of emptiness. Just before sleep, a kind of emptiness arrives. No thoughts, no goals, no names, and Zen invites you into that space. There go. Let time fall away and sense the scent of emptiness. It's waiting for you. It always has been. The seasonless nature of sleep. Sleep is a season too, but one that opens inward. Here, no flowers wilt, no leaves fall, no snow comes, only pure being. Wordless, pineless, gentle. Tonight, step into that place. Let the scentless moment hold you, and in that holding, find yourself again. A you beyond all seasons. Zen says, when all else passes, what remains is simply you. Tonight, you don't need to be anything. You don't need to fulfill any role. You don't need to chase any time. Just be. Just breathe. And notice the scentless scent, the essence of you, the part untouched by change, the light that's always been. You are the scent beyond the flower, the stillness beyond the wind, the you that never fades, the mirror seeing without judgment, the broken mirror and the search beyond. In a quiet mountain village, inside a modest temple, lived an elderly Zen monk named Eon. He was gentle, soft-spoken. He chose his words with great care. At the entrance of the temple hung an old mirror. Its surface was cracked and clouded with age, yet Eon never replaced it. Over the years, his students would ask, "Why don't you hang a new mirror?" Eon would simply reply, "This one shows things as they are." No one fully understood what he meant, until a young woman named Naoko arrived at the temple. Afraid to see herself, Naoko had long been searching for peace within. She believed she wasn't beautiful enough, not successful enough, not good enough. Every morning, when she looked at her face, she saw only what was missing. And by the time she moved, she had no idea. She judged herself harshly for past mistakes and chased tomorrow while forgetting today. She'd heard about Eon and the temple's quiet way of healing. But on her first day, seeing the broken mirror, she'd quietly scoffed. "How can this old blurry thing help me see clearly?" Still, she stayed. A mirror does not speak. In Zen, the mirror is often used as a symbol for the mind. It reflects. It does not comment. It does not choose. It does not judge. It shows what is, without resistance or praise. One morning, Eon led Naoko to the mirror and said, "Just look. Don't fix anything. Don't judge anything. Simply look." So Naoko stood before it, and for the first time she looked without trying to change herself. The mind is also a mirror, Zen teaches. British author. When undisturbed, the mind reflects the sky clearly. But most of us carry the mud of the past and the fog of the future. Naoko began to sit before the mirror each day. The cracks started to make sense. She began to see her reflection not as broken. Latter is true. Even a fractured mirror tells the truth. And that truth is always worthy of compassion. Real change begins when you truly see. One morning, Eon asked her, "What do you see now?" Naoko replied, "I see the cracks, and I see a face as it is." Eon nodded. Now Zen begins. You're not forcing change. You're simply seeing. This is the deepest kind of transformation. Because real change doesn't come from effort. It comes from awareness, looking into the mirror before sleep. Now you're lying in your bed. Perhaps there is no mirror in front of you. But within, there is another one. Your inner reflection. You carry your own image in the mind. What you've done, what you haven't, what you said, what you regret. But what if, just for tonight, like Naoko, you simply looked? No fixing, no judging, only awareness. And even sleep becomes softer, because acceptance dissolves tension, the judgment-free silence of sleep. Zen teaches that sleep is the moment when the mind stops naming things, stops dividing the world into good and bad, success and failure, right and wrong. There is no mirror then, only being. Tonight, let your reflection be gentle. And know this, not a single crack in you makes you less whole. Though like Eon's mirror, you are complete, even in your imperfections. Sleep as the deepest act of acceptance. Don't force change tonight. You're already changing. You're already becoming. Just be with yourself. without conditions. As your head rests on the pillow, the mirror of your mind clears, and the one it shows, no matter what you see, is worthy of rest, of stillness, of peace. A mirror never lies. Zen says, the mirror shows all. How you see it is up to you. Tonight, do not interpret, just observe, just accept your softness, your strength, your quiet, pure noise, and look at this mirror well, for within it is wholeness, the reflection before sleep. Now, as your eyes begin to close, your heart slows, your breath deepens, your thoughts begin to fade, and only one thing remains. As you are, without judgment, quiet. Enough. The mirror is silent now, and in it peace reflects. Good night. You are enough. You are the light in the mirror, and that light will never go out. The memory of water, flowing without holding on. The river without memory. In the northern forests of Japan, there flowed a river that wound quietly through the trees. It had no signs pointed to it. It appeared on no map. The local villagers simply called it, the one that flows, the one that moves on, the one that forgets. By the river lived an old Zen monk named Kaito, alone and at peace. Those who met him all said the same. It seemed to have forgotten everything, yet he lacked nothing. The young man who carried memory. One morning, a young man arrived at the riverbank. His name was Renji. He carried a heavy bag on his shoulder and a tired look in his eyes. He had lived much. Breakups, regrets, failures, unspoken words, and far too many if only. Kaito greeted him in silence. They sat by the river without speaking. After a while, Renji asked, "Don't you ever think about the past?" Kaito smiled gently. "I think about it, yes, but I do not hold it. Even water doesn't carry the place it has just passed. To be like water. In Zen, water is the pure mind. It flows. It meets obstacles without resistance. If slow, it continues. If fast, it does not lose itself. It clings to nothing. It chases nothing. It simply lives the present." Kaito said, "To live like water is not to forget, but to stop clinging to what you remember. The silent master of letting go." Kaito handed Renji an old clay jar. He told him to fill it with stones. Each stone represented a thought, a regret, a memory, a person, a pain. Renji filled the jar until it was heavy, getting too heavy to carry comfortably. Kaito then asked, "How can you feel the water while holding this?" Renji had no answer. Kaito quietly lowered the jar into the river. "That's what letting go is," he said. "Making space for the water. Can flow be learned?" For days, Renji remained silent. He watched the river flow, sometimes calm, sometimes phony, sometimes loud, but always moving. One morning, he whispered, "I can walk through my past, but I no longer live in it." And that day, his face softened. The weight on his shoulders eased, and for the first time, he began to flow like water, becoming water before sleep. Now, you lie in bed. Maybe there are stones in your mind too. Old conversations, unfinished thoughts, regrets that circle like eddies. But tonight, try to become water. Don't stop, but don't force yourself forward. Don't forget, but don't hold on. Just flow. Thoughts come and go. When you chase them, they stay. When you allow them, they pass like ripples. Sleep like water. Zen says, sleep like a river. Soft, yet unstoppable. Let your sleep be a quiet lake. Undisturbed. Thoughts may touch the surface, but stay in your center. There, peace waits. There, depth lives. And every morning you can wake like a new spring. The shadow of the past lightens. Renji eventually returned home, but the bag on his shoulder was gone. He walked lighter now. When asked what he had learned, he simply said, "Kaito didn't teach me anything. He showed me a river, and I remembered how to flow." His past still existed, but it no longer walked ahead of him. Water always finds its way. Maybe you feel a little lost tonight. A little heavy? A little unsure. But know this. Water begins its journey lost. It always finds the way. Remember the water within you. It's already moving, even when you think you're stuck. And Zen says, don't resist the river. Let it shape you gently. Remember, without holding, your sleep draws near. Let the stones in your jar settle. Let the current of time slow down. Let the past drift quietly behind you. Because you are the water. Why? Live. Free. Tonight you don't need to solve anything. Just pass through it and keep going. Tomorrow will rise like a fresh river. You need only flow. Good night. You are the memory of water. And though no flow is forgotten, all of it passes. The temple beneath the lake. The map without a path. In the heart of a distant mountain range, long forgotten by maps and men, there was said to be a lake that had no shore. Not endless, just hidden. Hidden. They called it Shiori Lake, though no one could say why. Some said a temple once stood at its center, now lost beneath its surface. Others whispered that it was never built above ground to begin with, only below. No one could prove it. No one had seen it, except perhaps an old monk named Ayan. He arrived at the monastery one evening without a bag, without shoes, and without a word. Only a map, drawn in ink so pale it faded if you stared too long. He gave it to the abbot with a bow and said, "This map leads to nowhere you can walk." The abbot studied the paper and replied, "That is the only kind worth following." The student of echoes. Yen was assigned a young student to accompany him, Naoko, a restless novice who rarely completed his walking meditations without pacing. "Too much sky in your step," the abbot had said. Naoko had many questions. Answered a few. They walked for 5 days through fog and pine. No road, no signs, no end. Naoko asked, "Are we lost?" And replied, "We are exactly where the path disappears." They came to a clearing filled with mist, and in its silence a sound emerged. And dripping, single drops, wide intervals, like time itself had slowed. Naoko stepped forward and felt mud underfoot. Then reflection, like still and perfect until he disturbed it. And there, deep beneath the ripples, a structure shimmered in silence. The silence below. As Naoko gazed into the lake's still waters, Ien quietly sat down by the shore. "Look," he said. "The reflection you see on the surface is a world that does not truly exist." Naoko lowered his head. "Then what is real?" he asked. Ien smiled softly. "Reality lies beneath what the eyes cannot see. Beneath the water's surface, there is always silence, and that silence understands everything." Naoko picked up a small stone from the shore and tossed it into the water. Ripples spread. The silence was broken. But soon the waves settled, and the lake returned to its calm state. Ayan closed his eyes. Life is like this too. It moves, breaks, and settles again. What matters is waiting for the waves to pass. The temple revealed. The next morning, as the sun rose, Naoko and Ien looked closely across the lake. A faint shimmer appeared. The tip of a stone staircase was visible beneath the water. "This place," Ien said, "is not the end of the path, but a new beginning." Naoko stepped slowly into the cold water, unafraid. He followed the stairs downward. And there, beneath the water, he saw an ancient temple glowing softly in the quiet light. The world floating in its own silence and time. The breath of stillness. Inside the temple, Naoko and Ien sat together. They said nothing. They only breathed. With each breath, time slowed. With each breath, the world retreated. Naoko wondered aloud, "Why does time seem to stop here?" Ien answered, "Time measures movement, but here, stillness cannot be measured. That is why time here is as light as a breath." Returning to the surface. Days later, Naoko emerged from the temple to the world above. The sounds of life greeted him again. But he was changed. He carried the power of silence inside him, the awareness of waiting and of seeing what is often unseen. Ien looked at him and said, "Sometimes the true journey is not moving from place to place, but standing still where you are." Naoko smiled. Together, they began their walk back through the mountains, the walking silence. The mountains welcomed them back like old friends. With rustling branches, distant bird calls, and a path softened by pine needles. Naoko walked slower now. Each step had weight, and each pause had purpose. "Sensei," he asked, "was the temple real?" Ien did not answer right away. Instead, he bent down and picked up a curled autumn leaf. He held it up to the sun. "You held it in your breath. You saw it in your silence. If it gave you stillness, then it was real enough." Naoko looked down at his reflection in a puddle. The surface rippled. He no longer needed certainty. The village that listens. They came upon a small mountain village near dusk. Children ran along narrow stone paths. Lanterns swayed gently from windows. The villagers watched Ien and Naoko approach, but said nothing. One elderly woman stepped forward and bowed. "We heard the lake sang again," she whispered. "We haven't heard her in many years." Hiroi yawned. Ien only nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "she sings only to those who no longer ask her to." The villagers offered them tea and rice beneath an apricot tree. Naoko listened to the quiet laughter of the children, the wind, the clinking of bowls. Even here, the temple seemed to follow him, not as stone and stairs, but as stillness itself. The koan, beneath the moon. That night, under a full moon, Ien sat across from Naoko. He drew a circle in the dirt with a stick, then placed a pebble at its center. "Tell me," he asked, "is the pebble inside the circle, or is the circle around the pebble?" Naoko stared at the shape. His mind wanted to solve it, but his heart remained still. Finally, he bowed. "Neither," he said. "And both." Ien smiled. Feeling engaged is a good beginning. Naoko leaned back on the grass, hands beneath his head. Above him, the stars did not answer, and he did not need them to. Looking for a sleep on the water. As the village drifted into night, Naoko lay beneath a thin quilt of clouds. He did not replay the temple's shape in his mind. He did not long to return there, because something inside him had changed. The temple was no longer beneath the lake. It was beneath his breath, beneath his stillness, beneath his sleep. He closed his eyes, and the lake whispered again, not in sound, but in quiet presence. What is hidden does not need to be found. What is silent does not need to speak. You are already home, the bell that never rang. They said the bell had always been there. It stood atop a narrow wooden tower in the middle of the mountain monastery, carved with faded lotus flowers and ancient waves. No one could say who had built it, or when. No scroll recorded its name. No monk claimed to have heard it ring. It simply existed, like the wind, like the sky, without explanation or expectation. The bell itself was cast from dark bronze, smooth and unblemished without a single crack. But there was no rope, no striker, no hammer to sound it. Only a hush, a stillness that wrapped around it like fog hugging a valley. You monks often asked, "What is it for?" And the masters would smile, as if that very question had a sound of its own. One master, very old and nearly blind, once whispered, "It rings only when one stops needing to hear it." Taku had heard that phrase many times since he arrived at the monastery. He had been no older than 16 then, with quick fingers, a sharper mind, and a heart that drummed louder than temple drums. He had been sent there by his family. City people who thought a mountain retreat would calm the boy, settle his thoughts, make a man of him. The mountains were high, wrapped in clouds like rolled scrolls. The silence felt too heavy for someone like Taku, who had never known a world without noise. He walked quickly, thought quickly, even chewed his rice too loudly. Stillness made him itch. Quiet made him restless. And the bell, it made him furious. How could something so tall, so central, so revered, be so useless? Day after day, he watched the older monks bow to it as they passed. Some placed a hand against the wood of the tower, some whispered beneath their breath. No one questioned it. No one asked for more. It was as if the bell was a god who never spoke, and they loved it all the more for its silence. Saku was not so patient. He asked the kitchen monk, "Why is there no rope?" He asked the library monk, "Why does no record say who made it?" He even asked the abbot once, as they walked through the dew-covered garden, "What good is a bell that never rings?" The abbot had smiled, long and slow, like a sunrise over a cold field. "What good is the sky?" he asked. "It makes no sound, it cannot be touched, and yet, where would the clouds go without it?" Taku had no answer. But he kept watching the bell. Each morning, before the first bowl of rice, the monks gathered in the courtyard. They stood in lines like reeds, bowed to the east, and waited in silence. The sun would rise slowly behind the mountains, painting the tower in gold. The bell never moved, but its shadow stretched long across the courtyard, as if silently reminding them of something they were trying to forget. Taku's feet itched. He wanted to climb the tower. He wanted to knock the bronze just once to see if it would echo, to prove that it was real. But monks did not climb the tower. Monks did not ask for sound. Monks listened, and so he listened. At first, he heard only the sounds of his own resistance, the tapping foot, the grinding teeth, the questions hammering behind his eyes. Later, he began to hear other things, the wind passing between branches, the rustle of fabric as robes shifted, the small clicks of prayer beads between fingertips. Still later, he began to hear even more, the breath of the mountain, the stillness of the stone, the soft presence of something that wasn't sound, but wasn't quite silence either. Years passed. His walk slowed. His eyes no longer darted. His breath became longer, deeper, like the roots of trees reaching for water. And yet, the bell never rang. One night, he dreamed of it. In the dream, the sky had turned silver. The tower was taller than any tree. The bell swung without touch, once, just once, and its sound rolled across the valley like thunder, smoothed by rain. The trees leaned to listen. The rivers slowed. Even the stars trembled slightly. It was a sound so deep, it didn't reach the ears, it went straight to the bones. Taku woke with his chest aching. The dream stayed with him. He returned to the tower that morning, earlier than usual. The courtyard was empty, wrapped in mist. He stood at the base of the bell, looking up. He didn't want to ring it anymore. He just wanted to understand it. He placed a hand on the wooden pillar. It was cool with dew. The tower did not speak, but the silence around it thickened, like a blanket being pulled gently over a tired mind. "Are you waiting?" he whispered. But the wind answered for the bell. That day, the abbot gave him no chores, no prayers, no lessons. Instead, he said, "Go, sit with the bell." Taku nodded. He didn't ask how long. He didn't ask why. He went. The sun climbed high. The shadows shifted. The wind changed direction 3 times. He did not move. At first, thoughts came, as usual. Why? How long? What is the point? But he did not follow them. He let them pass, like leaves floating down a stream he did not step into. Then came memories. His mother's hands washing rice, the smell of paper in the city school, the night his brother fell ill, and the way the house was silent, not peaceful but full of worry. Still, he let them pass. Eventually, only the present remained. Breath, wind, wood, bell. And that space again. Not silence, not sound, but something just beneath them both. A kind of waiting that didn't need to end. That night, as the stars returned to the sky and the monastery fell into the hush of sleep, Taku sat beneath the tower. He looked up, and for the first time, he did not want the bell to ring. Because the not ringing had become its own kind of sound. He realized then that the bell had taught him everything, without ever moving, without ever making a single noise. It had shown him how to wait without desire, how to listen without expecting, how to sit without seeking. He smiled, and beneath the bell that never rang, he began to hear everything. He no longer returned to the bell as a student with questions. Now he returned as one might return to a pond, to sit, to reflect, and to be reflected. Every morning before the others stirred, Taku slipped through the courtyard's soft morning fog and climbed the stone steps that led to the base of the tower. He did not meditate in the usual posture. He simply sat cross-legged, eyes open, gaze resting somewhere just beneath the horizon of thought. The bell rose above him like a quiet moon, unmoving, ancient, and somehow alive. It was no longer the object of his attention. It had become the space within his attention. It was there and not there, present but not demanding presence. The teacher who taught by existing. One day, an old monk passed by as Taku sat in silence. He paused for a long time, watching the young man. Then, with the ease of one leaf falling from one tree, he asked, "You'll wait for it to ring?" Taku looked up, but not with surprise. "No," he said, "now I wait to hear what it says while not ringing." The old monk smiled without showing teeth, a smile as soft as breath leaving the body. "Then you are closer than most." He walked on, and Taku remained. As the seasons changed, the bell changed too. Not in appearance, but in what it drew forth. In spring, it gathered the scent of blossoms and wet wood. In summer, it shimmered in the heat like a mirage. In autumn, it wore the stillness of falling leaves. And in winter, it became a bell of snow. Mute, elegant, solemn. Each season taught Taku a new form of quiet. Each silence, a new tone. One winter morning, a young novice named Ko appeared. He was barely older than 12, robes too big, feet too fast. He had seen Taku from a distance, and finally, with wide eyes and a full belly of questions, approached him. Much like Taku, Ko hinted that he'd figured out what was wrong. He had a great idea. "Why do you sit here every day?" Taku, who now had some gray along his temples, turned slowly. Listen. Listen to what? The bell. Ko scrunched his face, but it doesn't make any sound. Taku's eyes softened. Is why I listened. Ko sat beside him, confused but willing. They sat together for an hour. The boy shifted, coughed, sighed. Eventually he whispered, I don't hear anything. Taku looked at him and said, that is the first thing it teaches. Ko blinked, then grinned. I like it anyway. And just like that, another silence was born between them. Not empty. Shared. From that day on, others joined him. Sometimes it was the kitchen monk with flour still on his sleeves. Sometimes the gardener, pausing with hands caked in earth. Sometimes even the abbot, who would sit without a word and then vanish like fog lifting. No one explained what they were doing. There was no rule, no schedule, only stillness. Only the bell, only the space that opened when nothing was expected to fill it. Years passed. The mountains did not change, but the monks did. The courtyard stone wore smooth under countless barefoot steps. The prayer flags faded into the color of the sky, and Taku's beard turned silver. But the bell, it remained untouched, still. And still, it taught them to wait without yearning, to breathe without clinging, to hear without listening. There was a time, late in his life, when Taku stopped speaking entirely. Not from a vow, not from discipline, but from a deep understanding that nothing he could say would ever be as full as silence itself. He communicated in glances, in the gentle way he served tea, in the time he gave to another's presence, and always through his companionship with the bell. In the early evenings when the lanterns were being lit and shadows stretched like memories across the temple walls, the monks would see him walking toward the tower. His pace was slow, not because of age, but because of death, as if each step descended into some invisible well within the earth, as if he walked not on the stone path but within the pauses between moments. He no longer sat under the bell to receive anything. He simply gave his presence, an offering made of nothing but attention, and somehow that was everything. One night, the wind blew hard from the north. The old wooden tower creaked. The bell swayed slightly in the dark, and all across the monastery monks sat up in their beds, not from fear, but from stillness made audible. The bell had moved. It had not rung, but it had moved. The next morning, they found Taku sitting beside it. His eyes were closed. His hands rested gently in his lap, and his breath had stopped. He had left quietly as he had once arrived. There was no ceremony, no chant, no drum, only silence. And the bell, swaying once more in the breeze, cast a faint shimmer across the courtyard. It had not rung. It never needed to, because Taku had become the sound. The bell had passed through him, and in doing so had rung across time, once, endlessly. Taku's legacy was never written in ink, nor carved in wood. It existed only in the way people paused by the bell, the way their breaths quieted when the wind touched the tower, the way the young novices grew up with a kind of gentleness in their hands that had not always been there before. Langnu song. The berserkers had formed. The bell continued its silent vigil, and those who sat near it found that its presence did something to time. Time, when spent near the bell, did not move forward. It unfolded. It had deepened. It softened like old cloth. One winter evening, as snow began to gather quietly atop the trees, Ko sat under the tower with a bundle of herbs resting in his lap. He was no longer young. The lines around his eyes bore the kindness of many quiet hours. His breath no longer rushed. A novice joined him, a boy with sharp eyes full of wondering silence. "Master Ko," the novice asked, "is it true that the bell is magic?" Ko looked up at the bell. "It depends on what you mean by magic," he said softly. The boy frowned. "Like that it can speak, or teach, or wake people up?" Ko smiled gently. "It does all of those things, but not in the way people think." The novice tilted his head. "Then how?" Ko ran his fingers gently over the bundle of herbs. "By doing nothing," he said. "By being exactly as it is." The novice stared at the bell a long time, then asked the most important question of all. "But why do people come here, hoping it will be more?" Ko's gaze didn't leave the bell. He inhaled deeply and said, "Because most people have forgotten what enough feels like. And the bell reminds them." That night, long after the novice had gone to sleep, Ko remained beneath the tower. The wind shifted. A fox padded quietly along the edge of the woods. The stars appeared, one by one. And somewhere deep within Ko, not in the mind but somewhere beneath it, a feeling rose, calm and whole. A feeling that this moment, this sitting, this silence, was not the prelude to anything. It was already complete. Days turned, seasons passed. The bell never moved, yet everything around it changed. Ko, now regarded by some as the monastery's quiet center, became known not for what he said, but for what fell away in his presence. Novices would come to him with questions held tight between their brows. After a while, they left with those questions softened and eventually forgotten. Not answered, but dissolved. And yet, Ko would never say he taught. "I only sit," he once told a visitor. "The bell does the rest." One morning, during the early light when the mist still clung to the tops of the pines, Ko sat once again at the foot of the tower. His posture was simple, neither strict nor slouched. His hands rested in his lap, not in mudra, but as leaves resting where the wind had placed them. He had long ceased to expect the bell to ring, and because of this, he heard it more clearly than ever. He heard it in the way the crow called 3 times and then fell silent. He heard it in the hush between wind gusts. He heard it in the stillness that followed, a thought passing through the mind like a ripple across a pond. The bell had become a mirror, not one that reflected faces, but one that reflected the silence behind all things. In time, Ko began to dream, not of the bell ringing, but of the spaces between those imagined chimes. In his dreams, there were people walking without hurry, children laughing softly in the rain, a woman kneeling beside a river, brushing her fingers through the water without speaking. Every image in the dream had one thing in common: no one rushed. And when he awoke, Ko thought, perhaps the bell's silence has entered even my dreams. One afternoon, a stranger arrived at the monastery, a pilgrim who had traveled for weeks, following a trail of quiet rumors. She was in her middle years, with eyes that had seen many cities, and yet looked out from behind a tired veil. Her robes were not of any school. Her voice carried the rhythm of someone who had once spoken too much, and now preferred not to. When she saw the bell tower, she froze. Her feet, once blistered by the long walk, suddenly felt light. She approached Ko, who was quietly tending to a few flat stones near the edge of the path. "Is it true?" she asked. "It has never rung?" Ko, not looking up, said, "It rings in its own way." The woman looked at him. "I have come so far hoping to hear it, but I hear nothing." Ko stood, dusted his hands. He looked at her not with pity or knowing, but with the still presence of one who expects nothing. He gestured for her to sit. "You dead?" And there, side by side, they sat for a long time, until her question dissolved too. She never again asked about the bell. She returned to her journey the next week, but walked much slower than before, as though the mountains had shown her how to take her time, as though a soundless chime still echoed in her bones. Now and then storms would come to the mountain. Winds howled, rain slammed against the stones, thunder cracked like ancient drums across the sky. The bell tower stood through it all, untouched, unshaken. Once, after a particularly long night of wind, the monks woke to find a single feather resting atop the bell's curved edge. White, still, perfect. No one spoke of it, but each monk, in their own time, went to see it. Some bowed, some smiled. One or two wept softly. Ko, standing at a distance, simply watched the feather fall hours later, carried by a breeze so gentle it could not be felt, only seen. He did not speak of the moment, but inside, he felt it clearly. The bell speaks only to those who can hear the featherland. That winter was long and silent. The snow came early and stayed longer than usual, blanketing the paths in quiet curves. Footsteps disappeared behind the monks as they walked, and the stone basin in the courtyard froze so still that even the wind began to step softly around it. Ko, older now, rose each day before the first light and walked to the tower, not out of habit, but because it had become a part of his breath. Just as sleep follows dusk and waking follows sleep, he would sit beneath the bell and watch the snow fall, not waiting for it to stop, not longing for spring, just watching. One morning, as the sky glowed pale with the promise of sun behind clouds, Ko felt something shift, not outside, but within. It was not sudden, not dramatic, just a faint loosening, like a knot untied, not by hands, but by time itself. He realized he had stopped listening for the bell altogether. He no longer even listened to the silence around it. He simply sat, and being near it became no different than being near a friend, one who needed no words, no gestures, no explanation. That day, the wind carried with it the smell of pine, the faint scent of cold water over stone. Ko closed his eyes. The air around him was utterly still, but inside something rang out. Not a sound, but a knowing. A clarity so full it felt like an answer to a question he had forgotten to ask. He opened his eyes, smiled without reason, and whispered, "Not to the bell, not to the air, but to everything." You do not have to sound to be heard. As spring returned, the courtyard slowly came back to life. The cherry trees, bare through the long frost, began to bloom one petal at a time. The monks, who had spent more time indoors during the winter, now resumed their walking meditations in the gardens, moving in long, quiet loops around the gravel paths. And still, each day, Ko sat beneath the bell. But now he sat not as a seeker nor as a teacher, but as someone who had become a part of the tower itself, another presence rooted in the same silence. He began to notice more. Not grand things, not spiritual revelations. The way moss had crept slowly along the edge of the wooden stairs. The way a spider spun her web beneath the eaves, breaking and reweaving it with each breeze. The way the birds never landed on the bell itself, but always near it, as if they too sensed its quiet presence. A small girl from the nearby village was once brought to the temple by her grandfather. She looked around with curious eyes, touching everything: stones, bamboo, robes, sleeves. When she saw the bell, she pulled at her grandfather's robe and pointed. "What does it do?" she asked. The grandfather opened his mouth to explain, but Ko raised a hand gently. "Would you like to see it do what it does?" he asked. The girl nodded. Ko led her to the edge of the platform, and the two sat in silence. She squirmed for a minute, then another, then, slowly as the air settled, her body grew still. The wind stirred the leaves, a crow cawed. Far away, a stream whispered down the mountain. After a while, the girl turned and looked up at Ko. "It feels like listening to a dream," she said. Ko smiled. "That's the bell." Many years passed. Ko's hair turned white. His steps became slower, like ripples instead of waves. His voice became rare but clear, like the sky after rain. People came from distant lands to sit beside the bell. Not to hear it ring, none hoped for that anymore, but to feel the presence of what did not change. Some called it wisdom. Some called it stillness. Others said nothing at all. But all of them left quieter than they had arrived. One evening, as the last light of the day slipped behind the western ridge, Ko sat under the bell for what would be the final time. The moon was rising. A breeze stirred the nearby trees, and the shadows shifted like robes sliding from the shoulders of the world. Quill closed his eyes. He did not try to stop his thoughts. He did not try to focus. He simply breathed, and in that breath he felt it again. That echo, not of sound but of silence, so deep it reached backward through time. He placed a hand on the base of the bell tower. The wood was warm from the day's sun. The bell above him did not move. And then, without any sound, he knew. The bell had always been ringing, in the way snow falls, in the way a child listens, in the way time holds its breath around the things we never name. Ko smiled, and like Taku before him, he left quietly. Not away from the world, but deeper into it. Not with a word, but with the full weight of presence. After Ko's passing, the monastery entered a season of silence deeper than any before. It wasn't a silence of mourning, it was a silence of presence. As if everyone, monks, birds, wind, felt the fullness of what had been shared without needing to name it. The bell remained, it did not ring, but its silence was now wider, as though it had absorbed the stillness of all who had sat beside it. The monks no longer told stories of Taku or Ko. They did not need to. Their teachings were not carved into the walls, but into the way a monk refilled a tea bowl, the way rice was served without haste, the way a young novice brushed the stone steps clear of leaves, even on windy days. The bell had become a kind of center. Not a thing to gather around, but a space that reminded them they had never been separate. Over time, new monks came, some young, some old, some with questions, some with none. But all of them, at one point or another, found themselves before the tower. And without instruction, they sat, no words, no ritual, just breath and bell, stillness and wind. There were no expectations anymore. The bell had no duty, the monks had no need, only the mountain remained, green, slow, eternal. And on some days, when the fog rolled low and the pines whispered above the rooftops, a visitor would still come, following a path told in stories, not maps. They would ask about the bell, they would sit. And when they rose again, something invisible would lead with them. A soft shift, a loosened knot, a question undone. Years passed, then decades. The monastery aged, as all things do. Some roofs needed repair. The trees thickened, the stone paths wore smooth. The bell remained, still untouched, still whole, still unmoved. Then, one summer night, a storm came, a great one. Winds howled. Lightning lit the valley with pale, flickering veins. The bell tower groaned beneath the weight of the storm, the wood creaking like an old man stretching his bones. And just before the thunder came, some say the bell moved. Not swayed, moved, not struck, but stirred from within, a vibration, a hum. a ripple in the deep stillness of the mountain itself. The monks, awake in their beds, felt it, not in their ears, but in the marrow of their bones, not like a sound, but like a remembrance. And for the briefest of moments, the entire monastery felt the weight of time lift, as if something ancient had turned just slightly in its sleep. When dawn came, nothing had changed. The towers stood, the bell hung, the air was clear. But something in their hearts had softened even more. They did not speak of the storm. They did not speak of the bell. They only went on with their day. Slower than usual. Gentler. It is said that now, in the present age, the monastery still stands. Few know its name. Fewer still make the journey. But those who do say that the path grows quieter the closer you get. Not because of any rule or vow, but because the air itself listens. They say if you sit beneath the tower, you'll feel something subtle, a hush that isn't absence, a stillness that isn't empty, a sound that has no pitch, no echo, but fills you just the same. And if you ask an old monk there why the bell never rang, he might smile and pour you tea. He might say nothing at all. Or perhaps, if your hands are steady and your breath is calm, he'll look you in the eye and say, "It rang once, when you stopped needing it to." And so it remains, the bell that never rang, but was heard by all who learned how to listen. Not with ears, but with silence. Not with minds, but with still hearts. Not once, but always. The lantern beneath the lake. There was once a monastery nestled in the crook of a valley where the mountains bowed to one another. It sat beside a wide, silent lake, so still, so glass-like, that many believed it was never water at all, but sky folded upon itself. No one remembered when the monastery had first been built. Its stones were weathered, its roofs curved gently like the backs of old monks, and its doors always opened inward. The lake had no name. The monks never gave it one. To name something, they believed, was to place it in a box, and the lake refused all containers. It was simply there, beside the monastery, breathing in light by day and holding the stars like secrets by night. Every morning, before the bells for meditation rang, a monk named Soothe would rise and walk barefoot to the edge of the water. He was neither old nor young. His robes were the color of ash, his presence the texture of mist. He would kneel and place a small wooden lantern upon the surface of the lake. But the lantern never held a candle. It was never lit, not once. And still, he placed it there each morning. The other monks noticed this practice but never asked. In the monastery, questions came slowly, like snow that waits until midnight to fall. Years passed. The lake rose and fell with the seasons. Lotus blooms came and went. The stars spun their stories above. Still, Soothe placed the unlit lantern on the lake. Once, during a particularly long winter, when the lake froze into a mirror of silence, a novice approached Soothe as he sat at the water's edge. The lantern, as always, rested beside him. The novice bowed and asked, "Where do you place it there, if it does not shine?" Soothe did not answer right away. He watched the wind skim across the frozen surface like a thought that never landed. Then he said, "Not all lights are meant to be seen. Some are meant to be remembered." The novice frowned. Remembered by whom? Soothe's smile was soft. By the stillness itself. The novice nodded, not in understanding, but in peace, and walked away. In time, Soothe grew older. His steps grew slower, but never heavy. He moved like reeds in the wind, giving, not resisting. One spring, after the rains, the lake brimmed with reflections. Trees leaned closer, the sky stayed longer. The lantern floated farther than usual. A breeze lifted it gently, carrying it toward the center of the water. Soothe watched, and for the first time in decades, he followed. The monks from the temple watched him wade into the lake, robes trailing behind him like shadows shedding their forms. He walked until the water reached his chest. Then he stopped. The lantern bobbed gently before him. He placed his palms together. He did not light it, he only bowed. When he turned and returned to the shore, the lantern remained behind, floating, and from that day on, he never brought another. The monks thought it was the end of the ritual, but it wasn't. Now, each morning, they would find the same lantern in a different place on the lake. Some days, near the reeds. Some days, beneath the arching footbridge. Once, nestled in the roots of the willow tree that had bent low enough to drink the water. No one touched it, no one questioned it. They simply watched. And in time, the watching became the ritual. A silent prayer that required no altar, no flame, no word. Only the willingness to witness. When Soothe passed, it was during the rain. The monks found him sitting on the covered porch, facing the lake, a bowl of tea untouched by his side. His breath had stilled, but his presence had not left. That morning, the lantern drifted directly to the center of the lake, where no current reached, where no wind dared linger. It sat there all day. At dusk, as the first stars blinked into being, a single ripple spread outward from beneath it. Not a fish, not a breeze, just a ripple, perfect and complete. And some monks, not all, would later say that for a brief moment the lantern glowed, not with flame, but with memory. A soft light, like something once dreamt. The lantern remains on the lake to this day. No one knows how it stays, no one sees it move. But each morning, it is there, waiting or not waiting. Visitors come now and then, asking if the lantern will ever be lit. The monks smile. And sometimes, if the sky is right and the air still enough, they answer, "It already is." And so, the story of the lantern began to echo beyond the monastery. Not through proclamations or scriptures, not through paintings or chants, but in the way visitors sat longer beside still water, in the way tea was poured with a little more patience, in the way someone paused before speaking or chose not to speak at all. Children from nearby villages would come on festival days and they would ask the monks, "Can we light the lantern?" The monks would smile and offer them wooden bowls instead, floating vessels, unlit, empty, gentle. The children would place them on the lake, and they would float, dozens of them, all moving slowly across the surface. And though none held candles, the lake that night seemed brighter. The villagers would whisper, "The lantern has many children now." But the monks said nothing. They only watched, and in that watching, the world softened, just a little. One night, as fog blanketed the valley, a great storm passed overhead. The wind howled, the trees bent low, the roof tiles trembled. Rain fell in great curtains, thick and breathless. Some feared the lake would swell and drown the monastery. Some feared the lantern would finally sink. But when dawn broke and the clouds parted like monks bowing, the lake shimmered. Still, clear, unbroken. And in the exact center of the water, the lantern floated. As it always had. As it always would. And from that morning onward, the monks stopped calling it the lantern that floats. They called it only what it had always been. The light that waits. The light that waits did not demand attention. It asked for no audience, no applause. It existed quietly, like the breath between words, the pause between heartbeats. One afternoon, a young monk named Haru arrived at the monastery. He was full of questions and restless energy, a stark contrast to the gentle rhythms that had settled around the lake and the lantern. Haru watched the lantern from the shore, fascinated by its stillness. One morning, he approached the oldest monk, who sat beneath the cedar tree, hands folded in his lap. "Why do we not light the lantern?" Haru asked. "Why does it float, unlit, day after day?" The old monk smiled, eyes crinkling like worn parchment. "Because the light it holds is not from fire," he said. "It is from patience, from presence, from the waiting that is not idle, but alive." Haru frowned. "How can waiting be alive?" The old monk gestured to the lake. "Look at the water. It waits for the rain, the sun, the moon. It holds all these without trying to grasp. It is still, yet full of life." Haru considered this, feeling the tension in his chest soften. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Haru sat by the lake, watching the lantern drift lazily on the glassy surface. He felt a calm settle inside him, like a seed planted deep, waiting to grow. Seasons turned. Haru grew into his patience, learning to hold questions like the lake holds the sky, without disturbance, without expectation. After 10 minutes, Haru opened his eyes. And one dawn, as mist wove itself through the trees and the world seemed to hold its breath, Haru stood at the water's edge, his hands cupped gently around the unlit lantern. He did not light it. Instead, he placed it on the water and watched it float away, carrying with it a light, unseen, yet deeply felt. The monastery continued to thrive, quietly, rooted in the wisdom of waiting, the light that never flickers, but always glows. And so the lantern beneath the lake remains, a symbol not of illumination by fire, but of the gentle, enduring light within stillness itself. Years passed, and the monastery's quiet presence began to ripple beyond the valley. Travelers spoke of a place where time slowed, where even the air seemed to pause with reverence. A poet arrived one day, drawn by whispers of the floating lantern and the still lake that held it. She came with a journal, hoping to capture the essence of the place in words. But after days spent sitting silently by the water, she found herself writing fewer poems and feeling more like a listener to the world's soft secrets. One evening, beneath a sky washed with stars, she asked the elder monk about the lantern. "Is it ever truly dark beneath that light?" she wondered aloud. The monk smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Darkness and light are but passing guests," he said. "The lantern waits beyond both. It is the quiet space between them." The poet closed her journal and sat in silence, feeling a calm so deep it seemed to stretch beyond the edges of time. Seasons cycled as always. The lake froze in winter, thawed in spring, shimmered in summer, and wore a coat of golden leaves in autumn. Each day the lantern moved gently with the currents, a silent companion to the changing world. New monks came and went, each drawn in some way to the peace that flowed from the lake. Some tried to understand the lantern's mystery. Others simply accepted it as part of the monastery's breath, and all found in it a lesson unspoken but deeply known, that presence matters more than action, that waiting holds its own strength, that the light we seek may already be inside, softly glowing in the quiet. One night, as a soft rain whispered against the tiles, a young novice named May sat beside the lake, struggling with restlessness in her heart. She longed to make the lantern shine, to bring it to life with fire and purpose. Frustrated, she whispered to the still water, "Well, do you not light it? Why wait so long in silence?" The rain fell harder, and May's words dissolved into the night. Then, in the depths of her mind, a quiet voice responded, "The light you seek is not outside, it is the calm within. The waiting is the becoming. May closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the rain soak through her robe and the cool earth beneath her. The restless longing softened, replaced by a gentle patience she had never known. When dawn came, the lantern floated peacefully on the water, unlit but glowing with a light no candle could match. With each passing day, May found herself drawn closer to the lake's edge. The stillness there became a refuge, a place where the clamoring thoughts in her mind could settle like dust on ancient stones. She observed the lantern as it drifted gently, never hurried, never forced. In time, the lantern seemed to become more than just wood floating on water. It became a symbol, a mirror reflecting the quiet growth within herself. One morning, as mist curled over the lake like whispered secrets, May noticed something she had not seen before. The surface of the water was not perfectly still. Tiny ripples moved outward from beneath the lantern, as if something unseen stirred in the depths. Curious, she knelt beside the water and watched. The ripples expanded, touching the reeds, the stones, the roots of the willow tree. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm all their own, steady, slow, eternal. May understood then that the stillness was not emptiness, but fullness. The waiting was not absence, but presence. The lantern did not need to shine to be a light. Its very being illuminated the lake, the valley, the sky. She whispered softly to the water, "Thank you for teaching me to wait, to be still, to see the light that does not burn." The water shimmered in reply, as if in quiet blessing. Days turned to months, and months to years. May grew into her own quiet wisdom, walking the monastery paths with a new grace, a rhythm in tune with the gentle pulse of the lake. She became a teacher, sharing not words but presence, sitting with those who struggled, simply holding space, much like the lantern floating on the water. And the lantern continued its silent journey, untouched, unlit, yet radiant. In its quiet voyage, it carried the prayers of all who watched it, the hopes, the fears, the patience, the love. And in this way, the monastery became not just a place but a living breath, a sanctuary where the light waits, always. The old Zen master who spoke with the wind. A story of stillness and the voice of the wind. Far away, beyond any mapped trail or sign-posted road, there stood a small monastery surrounded by bamboo. It was nestled near a river, close to the most intimate voice of the forest, yet far from the noise of the world. An old Zen master lived there. No one remembered his real name, for no one called him by it. Everyone simply knew him as the one who spoke with the wind. Whenever someone called out to him, it seemed the wind would also respond, whispering through the trees as if joining the conversation. The master rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were like the wind, never forceful, never loud, just passing through you, leaving something behind. Those who sat with him often didn't know whether they had been given an answer, yet days later, sipping morning tea, they would feel his words rustle within them like a leaf trembling quietly in the mind. Every morning, before the sun rose, the old master would walk barefoot on the dew-soaked grass and vanish among the bamboo. There, beneath a large moss-covered stone wrapped in vines, he would sit. Sometimes, for hours, he would remain motionless on that stone, and those who happened upon him would notice something strange. How the wind seemed to gather around him, circling gently, dancing through the bamboo like a careful guest. A young novice once saw this and whispered to the others, "I think the wind really understands what he says." One of the monks only smiled and replied, "No, the wind already knows. The master simply reminds it." One day, a young monk named Riku arrived from a distant temple. He was in search of something, though he did not yet know what he had lost. The old master welcomed him in silence, served him tea, and then walked into the bamboo. Riku followed. This time the master did not sit on the stone. Instead, he turned to face the wind and closed his eyes. Riku waited. 10 minutes. 30. An hour. Finally, he couldn't help but speak. Master, the wind did not blow today. We could not hear it. The old man, eyes still closed, replied softly. The wind always blows, but sometimes only through you. Riku didn't understand, but strangely that no longer troubled him. Once, such riddles would have stirred frustration. Now they planted something quieter within him. That afternoon, for the first time, Riku wandered alone into the bamboo, not to the stone, but to a quiet patch of grass. He sat, he closed his eyes, and there, on his cheek, he felt the faintest breeze. Maybe, he thought, the wind only comes when the questions stop being asked aloud. Days turned into seasons. Spring's gentle breath became summer's heavy stillness, which melted into autumn's falling leaves and winter's bare silence. Nothing in the monastery rushed. Even time itself walked softly here, more listener than keeper. Riku no longer sought answers. He brewed tea, swept leaves, gathered firewood, all without hurry. Each motion became a quiet ceremony, a kind of wordless prayer. One morning, the master didn't return from his walk. Riku found him deeper in the forest, leaning against a tall tree, eyes closed. He rushed to his side. "Master, are you all right?" The old man opened his eyes, a soft smile. "The wind told me something," he whispered. "What did it say?" "It said, 'My time has come. It's time to return.'" Riku's eyes welled up. "What should I do?" The master took his hands, slowly, clearly. "Keep listening. Wait until the wind calls for you. And when it does, just walk." That night, the wind came gently, barely touching the leaves. The forest exhaled something old and sacred. At dawn, the old master passed. Quietly, without struggle, like the last leaf falling when the tree is ready. Riku found him seated on the mossy stone, eyes closed, a smile still resting on his face. The wind blew a little stronger that morning. The bamboo swayed as if bowing in gratitude. The sky seemed a bit brighter. I went to bed, still breathing heavily, prepared to put all his infights in captivity. Riku sat on the stone for the first time alone, closed his eyes, faced the wind, and waited. The story did not end there. As Riku sat day after day, something shifted. Visitors began to come, drawn not by words, but by presence. No announcements were made, no teachings declared, but one by one people came. Each found something different in the wind. For one, it was a memory of a lost parent. For another, a forgotten melody from childhood. For yet another, forgiveness not yet spoken. But for all, the wind became something alive. And Riku, he hardly spoke anymore. He didn't need to. They began calling him the one who speaks with the wind. But no one knew whether they spoke of him or the master who had come before. Years passed again. One day, a woman arrived. Her shoulders drooped, not from luggage, but from life. Her eyes searched for rest. Riku led her to the stone. They sat in silence. Only the bamboo and wind were present. As the sun dipped, the woman wept. "What did the wind say to you?" Riku asked. She wiped her tears. "Nothing." Riku nodded. "Sometimes," he said. "The deepest answers come without sound." And then, long after, a child wandered into the bamboo. The robe was too long, the feet were bare. No shoes, no past, just eyes full of questions. The child sat beside Riku. "Master," he whispered, "what does the wind want to tell me?" Riku, now bent with age, opened his eyes and smiled. "Are you ready to listen?" The child nodded. Riku turned to the wind, closed his eyes, and that morning the wind rose unlike ever before. The bamboo bowed, the sky brightened, and in the breath between moments, Riku stopped. He did not fall. He did not fade. He simply was no longer. But the wind kept blowing, and the child listened. The old Zen master left no scriptures, no scrolls, no instructions. He left the wind. And to this day it still drifts through the bamboo. Perhaps one day, you too will sit at the edge of such a forest. You'll close your eyes. You'll turn your face to the air, and you'll hear something, maybe a question, maybe a memory, maybe just stillness. But whatever it is, know this: the wind speaks to you too.